Jerusalem Online, I'm Mike Greenspan. The brutal knife murder of an Israeli yeshiva student in the West Bank city of Hebron topped the headlines here this week. It's also at the top of this week's look at the people and the stories behind the news. But what else was on Israelis' minds? The precedent-setting arrival of nearly 200 Muslim religious pilgrims from a country considered to be Israel's avowed enemy, and a festival of the performing arts. The 1993 Israel Festival got off to an entertaining start. The yearly happening of the arts is among the subjects we'll be covering today. We'll also show you how the greening of Israel is paying off for South Africa. All on today's show. But first, peace. While some members of government here claim it's closer than most people realize, the possibility of peace was far from many minds this week as Israelis buried 22-year-old Jewish religious student Erez Shmuel. Shmuel was brutally stabbed to death as he walked to prayers in the predominantly Palestinian West Bank city of Hebron. At his funeral, family members called for restraint. But shortly before, Jewish settlers allegedly opened fire on Palestinian stone throwers near the site of the murder, lightly injuring 2 women and a child. Other settlers allegedly smashed Palestinian windshields. Some settler leaders condemned the vandalism, but others continued to complain of what they call inadequate protection from the army. Joining me now is Yechiel Leiter. He is the executive director of the foreign desk of the Yesha Council. That's the roof organization of Jewish settlers in what many Israelis call Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, and what most of the world continues to call the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Welcome, Yechiel.
Good to be here, Mike. Thank you.
Palestinians will tell you that Hebron is their city. It's been that way for a long time. It's home to them, that the Jews have no place there. What is the Jewish connection to Hebron?
Let's not forget that Hebron really is the first Jewish city. It's the birth of monotheism, the home of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, King David, and 3,000 years of an unbroken chain of Jewish civil life in Hebron until it was terminated in 1929 in the brutal massacre of the Jewish community.
Now, the Jews of Hebron have a choice. There is nearby, alongside Hebron, a Jewish, an all-Jewish city called Kiryat Arba. They could live there, but certain Jews have chosen to live right smack dab in the middle of town among the Palestinians. Isn't that just asking for trouble?
Well, Hebron really is just a microcosm of Israel in the Middle East. Isn't it asking for trouble to establish a Jewish state in a sea of 200 million Arabs who really don't want us here? Yet I lived in Hebron for 8 years because I'm committed to the idea that no place in the world, particularly in Israel, should be Judenrein. Free of Jews is a notion that should have gone out of style in the Second World War.
Some of the Jews living in Hebron are indicating that in these days they feel abandoned by the government of Israel. Do you share that feeling?
Well, I think it's a sentiment that many Israelis feel, not only in Hebron, not only throughout Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, but throughout the country as well. There has been a spate of incessant violence perpetrated by Arabs against Jewish innocents throughout the country at a rate that we haven't seen in recent years. And this has a lot to do with the positioning of our government, the President Rabin Meretz government, in Washington vis-a-vis the negotiations.
Are you trying to say that the Rabin government is being too forthcoming and that foments further violence? One would expect the opposite would be true.
Forthcoming would almost be a compliment to the kind of concessionary stand that this government has opened up in Washington. We have given everything. We've received absolutely nothing. Faisal Husseini begins a negotiating session very clearly saying that he is going to get everything and give nothing, and our foreign minister, Mr. Peres, says that we have everything to give and the Arabs have nothing to give. Well, that's not how you do business.
All Israelis continue to wonder how to respond to continued Arab attacks upon them. Some settler groups have called for independent action at a time when they feel the army is not giving them sufficient protection. Some people have labeled that vigilante action. What, in your mind, is the appropriate response to Palestinian violence directed against Jews?
Well, I don't think we can separate the political machinations of the negotiations in Washington from violence on the ground. This government set out from its inception to demonize the Jewish settlers in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, to delegitimize the Jewish communities that every previous Israeli government has built since the Six-Day War. And the effect that we felt on the ground is that Arab violence. If we're demonized in their eyes, then our lives have become that much cheaper in their eyes as well. And what we have to target is not so much the violence on the ground, although that, of course, is something we face every day, but and continue to persevere through it. But we have to confront the political situation, the concessionary stand, the unilateral, preemptive concessions that Mr. Rabin has been making in Washington.
Again, though, would you favor the establishment of an independent policing force of some sort by settlers to respond to Palestinian violence?
No, I think that community patrols are something the government has always encouraged in the context of the law, in the context of the army, in the context of cooperation with the local police. Certainly not independent or outside of the law. But I think what we are going to have to see, if the present government course continues, is massive public civil disobedience, which is something that we saw in the United States in the 60s and 70s vis-a-vis the war in Vietnam, vis-a-vis the rights of blacks. I think that our right to our homeland after a 2,000-year exile, after so much of our blood has been spilled to hold on to this land, civil disobedience in order to protect the relationship with that homeland, Israel's heartland, is justified.
Let me ask you one last question. I'll ask for a quick answer. Is there room for compromise? We're talking peace today. Let me suggest a compromise that might come up around the negotiating table. That as part of the autonomy plan, the Jews living in Hebron would agree to move out of that predominantly Palestinian city and confine themselves to adjoining Kiryat Arba, an all-Jewish town. Would you accept compromise of that nature for peace?
The attempt to make an area Judenrein isn't compromise. That's a
Judenrein
racist
meaning
idea.
Jewish-free.
I mean Jew-free turf, yeah. That was tried in Europe, and it led to the Second World War. The compromise that has to be implemented today is that we change the parameters of debate. Today there is a Palestinian majority, a 70% Palestinian majority, in 80% of Palestine, in eastern Palestine. Let's see a democratization of eastern Palestine first, and then let's talk about the status of Arabs here in western Israel.
Yechiel Leiter of Yesha, the Council of Jewish Settlers in the West Bank, Gaza Strip. Thanks very much for joining us. The trials and tribulations of Jews who choose to live among Palestinians. And what happens when Arabs from one of Israel's most outspoken enemies drop in for a visit? That story when Jerusalem Online continues. Online continues now. Israelis were buzzing this week about the unprecedented arrival here of almost 200 Muslim religious pilgrims. From where? From Israel's avowed enemy, Libya. The two countries have no diplomatic relations. The Libyan visitors arrived overland via Egypt for a 5-day tour of holy places, timed to coincide with the Muslim feast of Eid al-Adha. That's the feast of the sacrifice. The history-making guests were warmly welcomed by Israel's Minister of Tourism, Uzi Baram. Their trip was arranged by Israeli multimillionaire Yaakov Nimrodi and Saudi Arabian billionaire Adnan Khashoggi, all with the blessings of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. The inevitable question, was Gaddafi himself planning a similar journey?
I believe that Mr. Gaddafi will come to visit Israel in this year, inshallah.
Whether or not Muammar Gaddafi tries to visit Israel, the visit of Libyan Muslims has already fueled expectations of a change of attitude by one of Israel's most outspoken enemies. Though the pilgrims used a Jerusalem press conference to call for continued struggle for the liberation of Palestine, many here still believe their presence could be a harbinger of peace. But it has also sparked concerns that Tripoli is simply using the trip to weaken U.S.-led international sanctions against Libya, which refused to extradite two of its citizens suspected of blowing up Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland in 1988. The pilgrims' first destination was the mosques on Jerusalem's Temple Mount, among the world's most important Muslim holy sites. The dome on the Dome of the Rock is now under renovation. That could be timely, as some Israelis see it, because the visit by Libyan Muslims could pave the way for pilgrimage from other Arab states, which, like Libya, have no diplomatic ties with Israel. That would bring hundreds of thousands of Muslims to Israel and the Holy Land, conceivably creating new bridges of understanding. Is that what the future holds, or was this simply an optical illusion? That's something to think about. And here's something else. Israeli ideas. They're taking root in Africa. The story right after this.
Jerusalem Online headlines, I'm Miriam Hirschlag. While there is uncertainty over whether direct peace talks between Israel and its neighbors will resume in Washington, the outlook is more positive for the multilateral talks, which include Europe, the UN, and other interested countries. Israel's deputy foreign minister described a recent round of these talks as the most successful so far. He said they progressed from vague statements of principle to concrete proposals in such areas as economic development, arms control, and cleaning up the environment. Another promising development in the talks, for the first time, members of the Arab League, Morocco and Tunis, have agreed to host meetings of multilateral work groups. A high court ruling means that for the first time, unkosher meat is to be imported into Israel. Until now, the government had a monopoly on importing frozen meat and had only brought in kosher products. The court decided that the monopoly was illegal, opening the market to private importers. The dealers say there is a demand for unkosher meat among Israel's secular majority, and they predict they will bring in $38 million worth of that meat annually. Filmmaker Steven Spielberg made a lightning visit to Israel recently to shoot the epilogue for his latest project, Schindler's List. It's the true story of how a German businessman, Oskar Schindler, rescued 1,200 Jewish workers at his factory during the Nazi Holocaust. Schindler is buried in Israel, and Spielberg shot the movie's ending at the gravesite. Included in the scene were many of those actually saved by Schindler. Young Israeli rock fans may have a treat coming their way in September. According to several newspaper reports, Michael Jackson is coming then as part of a Middle East tour promoting his Dangerous album. And finally, the campaign to buckle up in Israel has moved to the back seat. A new law requires that riders in cars manufactured after 1987 use belts in the back. Those who don't face a fine equal to about $60 US. I'm Miriam Herschlag for Jerusalem Online.
Jerusalem Online continues. Making the desert bloom is something Israelis are particularly proud of, replanting their barren land to ensure its future. Now, some of that hard-earned expertise is being put to use to help build the future of another land half a world away. More in this special report from Jerusalem Online's Linda Scherzer.
Planting trees in Israel, a powerful symbol. Adding to the symbolism of this ceremony are the people planting the saplings, black and white South Africans, environmentalists, people active in the greening of South Africa who've come to Israel as guests of the government and the Jewish National Fund, the foundation responsible for planting trees in Israel. They hope to go back to South Africa with new ideas on how to raise awareness of the environment.
Trees are so peaceful, trees are so wonderful, and when you look in the areas of Soweto and Alexandria and many of the other cities around South Africa, you see bare areas where greening would soften those harsh outlines, those harsh places.
2.5 years ago, using the JNF as its model, this group launched Trees for Africa to green the barren townships and homelands of their country. Recently, the South Africans visited Israel and discovered that in terms of climate and environment, the two countries have a lot in common.
We have a lot of dry areas in South Africa, but there's just so much that we can share, the ideas, the knowledge that the Israelis have over many years practiced in the planting and making the desert bloom.
We felt there was a need to emulate the work that JNF had done in Israel and green South Africa, which is turned into a man-made desert.
In a tent in the Negev, the group met the people of the desert, the Bedouins, and learned more about their Spartan life in this barren environment. The mission of Trees for Africa is to give communities, mostly black disadvantaged communities, living in areas almost as barren as this desert, to give them control over their environment by giving them trees to nourish the soil and eventually to provide shade, firewood, fuel.
We're talking about many communities who have been disenfranchised for generations, that have had very little opportunity of experiencing a really healthy green environment.
Within 2 months.
Like the JNF, Trees for Africa raises money through corporate and private donations. The community itself plants the trees, waters and maintains them. A process, say organizers, which both nourishes the soil and feeds the black South African sense of spiritual well-being.
It gives them a sense of pride, of ownership and involvement, because they, in turn, are interacting with nature and bringing back to nature what they had hitherto taken away.
To date, Trees for Africa has planted 500 trees a day, a fraction of the tens of millions of trees planted in Israel over the last 90 years. But according to staff members, even one tree has a multiplying effect.
We've planted approximately 180,000 trees. What we believe, though, is because of the information and education program that we've launched, we've caused the planting of several million trees.
The Trees for Africa project has also served as an example of coexistence. Black and white South Africans working together for the same goal. In addition to the ecological benefits of planting trees in barren urban areas, organizers hope the Trees for Africa bear other fruits as well, that in a small way it serves as a bridge, helping to improve ties between the State of Israel and the new South Africa. Linda Scherzer for Jerusalem Online, the Negev Desert, Israel.
The greening of South Africa, with some help from Israel. Before we look into our POB this week, a special Jerusalem Online thank you goes out to Harry Pearl of Rochester, New York. Thanks to your unstinting efforts, Harry. Jerusalem Online is now being seen on Rochester Cable 15 and Brighton Cable 12. So to our newest viewers, a warm welcome, and you can all thank Harry Pearl for bringing us into your homes. Well done, Harry. Meanwhile, what's in the mail this week? Well, among other things, this letter from V. Priel of Brossard, Quebec in Canada. Recently, my daughter went to Israel, she writes, and decided to visit her grandmother in an old age home. She forgot to ask me the address. She wrote me a letter. Well, listen to this excerpt from that letter written by V, and we can only guess your first name, V Priel's daughter. Being in Israel made me feel like living there. I couldn't find the right bus stop, so I asked the bus driver to help me. We passed it, so he said he'd drive me there on the return. He did, but couldn't find it. We drove to another old age home, and another, and another. I was the only passenger. I asked him how this could be on his route. He said it wasn't, but if I'd only come to Israel for 5 days to see my grandmother, he would get me there. He drove me right to the front door. Only in Israel, I say. It was wonderful. That's right, only in Israel. All of your comments, questions, and suggestions are always welcome here at Jerusalem Online, and ta-da! There's a free gift for the first 100 people who specifically asked for it. The group is Orot HaShchuna, Neighborhood Lights. That's the group that brought the message of Project Renewal to listeners around the world. That's the Jewish agency project that is revitalizing Israel's troubled neighborhoods. You've seen excerpts from Orot HaShchuna's new show, Sasha Comes Home, right here on Jerusalem Online. Weird name? Not really. Among these Israeli kids is one named Sasha. He's a recent immigrant from the former Soviet Union, and their repertoire includes material that tells the unique story of that unique Israeli experience, homecoming. If you like that, you'll love this. The first 100 people writing or faxing our POB and asking for it receive a free Orot HaShchuna audio cassette. Here's how to do it. Write Jerusalem Online, POB 33003, Jerusalem, Israel. That's Jerusalem Online, POB 33003 in Jerusalem. Or fax us at country code 972-2381658. That's 972-2381658. 100 free audio cassettes of Orot HaShchuna for the first 100 people asking for them. Write to our POB, and don't forget when you do, tell us when and on what station you watch Jerusalem Online. We'll be right back. We're back. These are festival days in Jerusalem. The Israel Festival is filling the nation's capital with a superb sampling of performing arts and artists from around the world. Festival director is Omri Nitzan, joining me now. Hi, Omri.
Hey.
What's on the agenda this year?
We have about 53 different performances from all over the world. Major 3 operas, like the Komische Opera from Berlin, with a fantastic, famous production of Orpheus and Eurydice, directed by Harry Kupfer, with Kowalski in the main role. We have the Vienna Stadtoper with magic flutes, and the Verona Opera from Italy with a co-production, in a co-production with the Israeli opera, doing Aida in Caesarea.
Not to mention some very good Israeli ballet.
No doubt. The Batsheva Dance Company, our maybe most distinguished modern dance company, opened the festival in a special evening, a unique piece which is called The Opening of the Festival. And this piece included in it the speeches of the president of the country, Mr. Weizmann, and the Minister of Education and Culture at that time, Shulamit Aloni, and the artistic director of the festival as part of the dance.
Sounds like the medium was the message, and I understand that the list of festival events goes on and on. That's quite a lot of festival for a country of only 5 million people. How do you explain that?
I think the Israel Festival expresses the eagerness and the need of the Israeli audience to confront and to meet with the best achievement in of the performing arts all over the world. They are very demanding. I mean, I'm talking about the audience. They are very unforgiving. If it's bad, it's bad, and if it's good, they're just raving reviews and raving reactions.
Tough audiences. All that's great, but for young Israelis, can the Israel Festival events of this level and type, possibly compete with a recent concert of Guns N' Roses or this fall's expected arrival of Michael Jackson?
The fact is that out of 120,000 tickets that we issued this year, we already sold more than 90,000, the festival just in this 5th day. So I believe although we have good competition around the country, the Israel Festival in Jerusalem, which draws audience from all over the country and the world, from the audience point of view, it looks very good.
Let me ask you about that. I know that other international festivals really bank very heavily on drawing tourists, foreign audiences who come especially to see the festival. And there's a sense here that the Israel Festival hasn't done enough of that in recent years.
There is one reason for that. One thing is that really the Israel Festival is answering a demand from the Israeli audience. If you look at the map, everybody knows that this country is in fact in a relative siege, and the Israel audience has a connection and interest and curiosity to know what's happening overseas or in a cultural field. On the other hand, with the help of the Ministry of Tourism, which is sponsor the festival quite in a generous way this year, we try to initiate a way to approach potential tourists who are coming to the country. As around in the autumn, around November, we issue the highlights of the festival in the different tourist offices all over the world.
One of the highlights of the first few days of the festival was the screening of Sergei Eisenstein's classic film Alexander Nevsky here in Jerusalem with live musical accompaniment. Tell us more about that.
It was one of the rare occasions with this film, famous artistic work, one of the classics of the cinema, was performed, accompanied by the Jerusalem Symphony Orchestra, conducted by David Shalom, and it was done in a very special location. It was in the new municipal square, where the new municipality building is going to be open in the next few weeks.
How many festivals have you done so far, Omri?
3 festivals already.
How much longer can you possibly go on?
I'm still curious, and I still have an appetite to go on and to see more and to arrange this national cultural party.
Omri Nitzan, director of the Israel Festival, thanks very much for dropping by. And thank you for joining me on this week's look at the people and the stories behind the news from Israel. You've been watching Jerusalem Online. I'm Mike Greenspan. Shalom.